The last thing Musa expected at the divorce hearing was to leave feeling like the fool. He came to destroy her. But by the time the judge finished reading her financials, his hands trembled. Ebony, the quiet wife he once mocked, wasn't leaving with tears, she was walking out with millions and a crown he never knew she wore. The last thing Musa expected at the divorce hearing was to leave feeling like the fool. He came to destroy her. But by the time the judge finished reading her financials, his hands trembled. Ebony, the quiet wife he once mocked, wasn't leaving with tears, she was walking out with millions and a crown he never knew she wore. But let me take you back, because storms like Ebony don't come out of nowhere. They brew slowly. Quietly. Silently. Ebony met Musa when she was just 22, bright-eyed, soft-spoken, and full of dreams. Her dream? To start her own fashion line. Bold colors, African patterns, modern shapes. She used to sketch in the back of her old notebooks, dreaming of dressing women in strength. But when Musa told her about his dream to build a tech company, she didn't think twice. She folded her dream like cloth and tucked it away. This is what love means, she told herself. If he rises, we rise together. So while Musa built code, Ebony built a home. She worked long hours at the bank, came home to cook, clean, and listened to his rants about funding and bugs. When rent was due and Musa couldn't pay, she sold her gold earrings, quietly, without shame. She gave, not because she was weak, but because she believed in partnership. She believed in him. But dreams, when left in the dark too long, begin to whisper. At first, Musa was grateful. He called her my backbone, held her hand in public, introduced her proudly. But when his app finally took off, when the money came, and the spotlight followed, something in him shifted. He began to walk ahead of her instead of beside her. At conferences, he introduced her as someone helping me with stuff instead of his wife. At parties, he poured drinks while she stayed in the corner, ignored. To the world, he was a genius. To Ebony, he was becoming a stranger. One night, she stood at the edge of the living room, holding a tray of small chops for his friends. That's when she heard it. Laughter. And then Musa's voice. Ebony. Oh, she was just a phase, a beg. I'm past that now. The room roared with laughter. She didn't even blink. She just turned, walked back to the kitchen, and placed the tray down gently. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She felt herself disappearing. Slowly. Silently. Like smoke. But sometimes, when everything you gave is thrown away, something else awakens, something fierce. And that night, after Musa fell asleep, she walked into the tiny room that used to be her sewing space. The laptop was still there. Dusty. Forgotten. She hadn't touched it in 6 years. But when she opened it, and the folder blinked to life, Dream Designs by Ebony, something inside her sparked. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first file. Sketch after sketch, bold colors, loud shapes, her old self stared back at her. The girl who believed. The girl who dreamed before she started shrinking. She smiled. Not a happy smile. A knowing smile. A silent storm had begun. For the next 18 months, Ebony became two women. By day, she played the quiet wife, smiling when spoken to, cooking, cleaning, nodding politely as Musa mocked so-called female founders on his podcast. By night, she became fire. She stayed up while the house slept. Sketching. Designing. Researching. She watched tutorials. Studied fabrics. Learned e-commerce. Bit by bit, she rebuilt what Musa had convinced her to forget. But she didn't use her real name. No. She chose a bold, anonymous name, ABN, 3 letters, strong, faceless. Under it, she launched a quiet fashion brand online. Quiet, but fierce. And the world noticed. Orders came. Then praise. Then interviews. Investors. Partnerships. Growth. All while Musa thought she was doing nothing. But God is not blind. One day, Ebony decided to surprise Musa with lunch at his office, something she hadn't done in years. She packed his favorite jollof, arranged the tray neatly, and took a cab. At the front desk, the receptionist was new and young, barely looked up. Musa's secretary, however, was not unfamiliar. She had a round belly now. Pregnant. She looked up and smirked. "Oh. You're the wife," she said, as if tasting something sour. Before Ebony could speak, the woman laughed. "He told me you were his sick cousin." Then she rubbed her belly and looked away like Ebony didn't matter. Ebony didn't argue. She nodded once, turned around, and walked out of that building with the same quiet grace she had walked in with. But something inside her had changed. Not her heart. Not her pride. Her silence. She got into the cab, pulled out her phone, and called her lawyer. Only 3 words. "It's time now." Because she wasn't waiting for more proof. She wasn't waiting to be humiliated again. She had already done the work. Now it was time to walk. And Musa? He laughed when he got the divorce papers. He told friends she'd come running back. He even boasted, "She'll beg for alimony. But I'll teach her a lesson." What he didn't know was that the lesson wasn't for her. It was for him. Musa told everyone it was over. "She has nothing," he laughed. "No career, no assets, just old emotions and kitchen stories." To him, the divorce was a formality. A signature, a stamp, and freedom. He wore sunglasses to court, strutted in like he owned the building, and told his lawyer, "Make it quick. She's not even worth talking about." But he was about to discover something. Ebony had been quiet, yes. But she was never empty. On the day of the hearing, she didn't wear designer clothes or fancy makeup. She came in simple Ankara, her hair wrapped in a soft scarf. Her eyes, however, were different. No more sadness. No more confusion. Just calm. True calm. The kind that comes when you know the fire is behind you, not in front of you. She sat at her table while Musa chuckled, exchanged whispers with his lawyer, and glanced at her like a nuisance. The judge began with the formalities. Then came the question. "Mrs. Ebony," the judge said, "do you have any financial disclosures before we proceed?" The room paused. Musa looked up, frowning slightly. "Disclosures? What disclosures?" Ebony calmly turned to her lawyer and handed over a folder. Her lawyer stood, walked over to the judge, and placed the folder on the table. It was thicker than anyone expected. Inside were documents. Real documents. Not threats, not demands. Proof. Bank statements. Tax returns. International contracts. Investor letters. A full valuation report. ABN Studio. A growing fashion company valued at $18 million. The room changed. You could feel the air tighten. The judge took a moment to adjust his glasses. "Excuse me," he said, flipping to the cover sheet again. This is yours." "Yes, Your Honor," Ebony said softly. Musa leaned forward. "ABN Studio," he whispered. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. He had heard it before, in passing, on fashion blogs, Instagram reels, startup podcasts. He even made fun of the name once. She probably copied it from some Western brand, he'd said casually months ago. It won't last. Now, that very brand had its name in front of a judge. And the owner was the woman he thought still lived in his shadow. Ebony didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just sat still, letting the truth do the talking. For years, Musa had talked about greatness. She had built hers in silence. The judge continued reading. Your company was recently featured in Lagos Fashion Week. You signed licensing deals with 3 major textile companies. And you've expanded operations into Ghana, Kenya, and Rwanda. Yes, she replied. Under the brand ABN Studio. Yes. The judge paused, then looked directly at Musa. Mr. Musa, do you have a response? Musa didn't speak. He couldn't. His tongue felt heavy. His mouth dry. He had walked in expecting a clean break. A woman in rags, begging for scraps. Instead, he was sitting across from a storm in human form. A woman who had built an empire while he mocked her behind microphones. Ebony didn't need anything from him. She didn't want the house. She didn't want the car. She didn't want his money, or his fake apologies. What she brought into court wasn't a demand. It was a revelation. And Musa was now the one exposed. After the hearing, his friends didn't meet his eyes. His lawyer looked uneasy. The press outside, which had been tipped off about the rich tech bros' divorce, now had a far better story. The silent wife who built $1 million brand without her husband noticing. For days, the blogs ran wild. But Ebony didn't speak to the media. She gave no interviews. She simply went back to work. Not because she was hiding, but because she was done performing. She had already spoken, through her numbers, her growth, her peace. She signed the final papers, thanked her lawyer, and walked out without turning around once. Musa sat in his chair for several minutes, not blinking. The court clerk had to tap him and say, "Sir, it's over." But for Musa, that was just the beginning of regret. 6 months passed. And the world, like always, moved on. Musa's podcast lost traction. Sponsors quietly pulled away, saying the narrative no longer aligned with brand values. His new girlfriend left, saying he was too bitter, too obsessed with someone who had moved on. And Musa? He now lived in a serviced apartment. Still rich, yes. But somehow, emptier. Then one morning, in a waiting room before a partnership meeting, Musa picked up a lifestyle magazine. On the cover was a photo of a woman dressed in royal blue ochre with gold embroidery. She stood tall, her arms crossed, chin raised, eyes calm. It was Ebony. The headline: Africa's Silent Storm, How Ebony of ABN Studio Took the Fashion World by Surprise. He stared at the page like it had insulted him. Inside, the article told the story of a woman who built something from scratch while suffering in silence. It mentioned the betrayal, the overlooked talent, the resurrection of her dreams. And then, one quote in bold. "I wasn't trying to be loud. I was trying to be whole." Musa closed the magazine and lowered his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Not because someone made him feel that way, but because the woman he once belittled had become something beyond his reach. In another city, far from the whispers of courtrooms and old betrayals, Ebony stood in front of a mirror. The hotel suite was quiet, with large windows overlooking Nairobi's glowing skyline. She had just finished delivering the keynote at the Pan-African Women in Business Summit, where she was honored as one of the continent's most influential emerging leaders. She looked different now, not just in appearance, but in presence. Her posture held dignity. Her voice was calm, steady, like a woman who had stopped waiting for permission. Her assistant walked in, holding a copy of the same magazine Musa had just seen. "You've seen the cover, right?" Ebony smiled softly. "Yes," she said. The assistant added, "You made them all feel something. But you didn't drag anyone. That's rare." Ebony didn't respond right away. She walked to the window and looked outside. Planes blinked in the distance, and the wind pressed gently against the glass. "They thought I was quiet," she said at last. "But I was just focused." Then she whispered the words again, this time, to herself. "I wasn't trying to be loud. I was trying to be whole." Her journey hadn't been one of vengeance. No shouting. No public drama. Just consistent, invisible rebuilding. Ebony didn't need Musa's name to shine. She made her own. And it meant more because she built it from ash, not silver. She often thought about the past, but not with bitterness. Instead, she studied it like one studies the design of a broken dress, so she would never sew the same seams again. There had been nights she wanted to quit. Nights when orders failed to ship. When suppliers pulled out. When fabric arrived torn. When she sat in the dark crying, not because of Musa, but because of the weight of carrying everything alone. But she never stopped. She couldn't. Not because she had something to prove to the world. But because she had something to prove to herself. That she had always been enough. One afternoon, months after the court case, Ebony received an email from a prestigious fashion platform based in Paris. They wanted ABN Studio to headline a showcase that blended traditional African textiles with modern European cuts. Her brand had been watched silently by their curators for months. They were impressed, not just by her aesthetics, but by her story. Ebony took the offer, of course. Not because it would make headlines. But because it would make history. For the first time in her life, she packed her bags to travel not as someone's shadow, but as someone's name. Meanwhile, Musa's life had begun to shrink. Not financially, his business still survived. But emotionally, he was bankrupt. His new podcast failed. No one cared for the bitter tones or tired jokes. Investors who once chased him now stayed politely distant. And slowly, it dawned on him, it wasn't the app that gave his life meaning. It had been the woman who prayed while he coded. The woman who cooked while he hustled. The woman who sold her dreams to fund his. But she was gone now. And she wasn't looking back. Then, as if fate wanted him to feel it deeper, Musa received an invitation he hadn't expected. One of his investors, now pivoting to fashion, invited him to Paris Fashion Week. "You'll love it," they said. "Fresh air. New networks." He almost declined. But something inside him pulled. So he went. And there, in a gallery glowing with soft gold light and tall silhouettes, he saw the name again. ABN Studio. Featured prominently. The showcase was elegant, rich with African heritage. Models walked in Kent, Osso oak, and batik silk, modern cuts, strong shoulders, delicate embroidery. It was not just fashion. It was legacy. And then, she stepped out. Ebony. Wearing a simple black fitted dress. Ankara neck detailing. No jewelry. Just power. Raw, silent, effortless power. The crowd rose to its feet. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She bowed slightly, nodded once, and exited the stage. Musa stood in the corner, unseen. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He had never clapped for her before. And now, it felt too late. Later that night, in his hotel room, Musa stared at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. He realized that losing her wasn't just about marriage. It wasn't about love. It was about underestimating someone so deeply that you forget they have roots. And now, she had bloomed, without needing his sunlight. He thought about texting her. Just once. To say he was proud. To say he now understood. But what would he say? That he was sorry. That she proved him wrong. That he saw her now? He knew none of it would matter. Because she hadn't risen to be seen by him. She had risen because she remembered who she was, before he taught her to forget. Months passed. ABN Studio became a household name. From Lagos to London, Kigali to Cape Town, the design spoke for women like Ebony, strong, silenced, then risen. She never chased the spotlight, but it followed her anyway. She was invited to sit on panels with presidents' wives, to speak in boardrooms once reserved for men, and to mentor young girls who had been told their dreams were too loud, too soft, or too impossible. Yet despite all of this, her wealth, her fame, she remained simple. She still sewed. She still prayed. She still lived with the discipline of someone who remembered what it felt like to be overlooked. Her empire was made of thread and truth. One quiet morning, her assistant entered the studio with a strange look on her face. "There's someone downstairs," she said hesitantly. "He didn't book an appointment. But he asked to speak to you. He said his name is Musa." Ebony didn't flinch. She looked up from her sketchpad and simply asked, "Is he waiting?" "Yes." Ebony stood, removed her apron, and walked toward the door. Her voice was calm, her steps steady. When she reached the reception, Musa was sitting on the edge of the seat like a child waiting outside the principal's office. He stood as soon as he saw her. He had lost weight. The fire in his eyes had dimmed. He wasn't the man who mocked her anymore, but he also wasn't the man who first loved her, either. He looked unfinished. "Ebony," he said, trying to smile. "You look incredible." She nodded once. "Thank you. I saw the Paris show," he stammered. "I've been meaning to reach out. I didn't know how." Silence. Then he added, "I read your interviews. The magazine. The keynote speech. You're everywhere. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was young. Arrogant. Blind." Ebony didn't interrupt. She just let him speak. "I thought I was the one with the vision," he continued. "But you had something I didn't. You built alone. You built in pain. I see it now." Still, she didn't respond. She was listening, but her peace was louder than his words. Musa swallowed hard. "I guess I came here thinking, maybe we could start again. Not as husband and wife. I know I lost that. But maybe as something. Friends. Or partners." Ebony smiled. But not the kind he once craved, not sweet or soft. It was the kind of smile that said, "I'm not angry anymore. But I've healed far beyond where you left me." She stepped forward and said quietly, "Musa, you never broke me. You buried me. But I was seed. And seeds grow in silence." He lowered his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "I know," she said. "But I didn't rise for pride. Not yours. Not anyone's." He opened his mouth to say more, but she gently raised her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "But this is not your story anymore." And with that, she turned and walked back to her studio. Musa didn't follow. He knew now, he wasn't the villain or the victim. He was just the man who stopped looking too soon. And now, the woman he thought would always wait, was gone. That evening, Ebony sat on her studio floor, barefoot, sketching a new line. The theme was becoming. A collection inspired by women who had once been told to shrink. Each design featured something undone, an exposed stitch, an asymmetrical cut, a bold neckline that refused to be hidden. As she sketched, she thought of the many versions of herself she had outgrown. The girl who waited. The woman who gave too much. The wife who became invisible. All of them were pieces of her past. But now, she wasn't patching those pieces together anymore. She had sewn something new. Whole. Fierce. Quiet. Unapologetically hers. 1 year later, Ebony stood backstage at New York Fashion Week. The crowd beyond the curtain was roaring. Press, buyers, celebrities. Everyone wanted a seat at the ABN showcase. She stood beside her new business partner, a woman she once mentored, now a co-owner and investor. They clasped hands before the curtain rose. From a distance, someone asked her, "Ebony, how did you do it? How did you get from there to here?" She turned slowly and said, "I remembered who I was before the world told me I was too small." And then the lights came on. Models began to walk. Music soared. The world, once again, watched Ebony rise. But this time, they didn't just see her clothes. They saw her story. They saw her silence. They saw her strength. She didn't leave Musa with rage. She left with peace. And in that peace, she built a legacy. A legacy stitched with pain, healed with grace, and worn like royalty by the woman no one saw coming. Not even the man who once called her his wife.